viewpoint of those who are acting responsibly. Joining us now, Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina. Congresswoman, it's good to see you again. On this issue, what do you think can be done? Do you think it is at all a strategy here just to let him in that seat and not to address the situation?
I hope that's not the strategy. Number one, I love these New York Republicans. What's not to love about them? They're calling it out. They call it like they see it. They're calling out their own colleague, George Santos, in this particular situation. It is a problem for us in Congress because the American people, they don't trust anybody. They think all politicians lie, and there are good guys among us who are trying to do the right thing. He should resign, but obviously he won't. You saw in the clip earlier, he's smiling and almost giggling when the press gaggle is following him around. He's enjoying, loving, I would argue, the attention that he's getting right now. There are a couple of different processes to get someone out of Congress like this. The first would be via the Judiciary Committee, having a hearing and putting forth a resolution that gets voted out of Judiciary to come to the floor. I don't see that happening right now, but what you do see are serious questions, possible criminal investigations. If you're looking at his campaign expenses, there are some suspicious activity there. And then if you're looking at possible ethics investigations, we have an ethics committee. I hope that goes through the ringer here. He deserves due process, but he needs to get out. And I agree with the New York Post and his colleagues in New York on both sides of the aisle on this one.
It's a sideshow. And terrible.
By the way, Nassau Republicans, I found out firsthand from Peter King, can be pretty tough. He was a moderate. I was a conservative. And when he got mad at me, he told the Washington Post Scarborough just walked out of a tent revival in the Deep South barefooted, so you don't need to listen to him. I feel for you and other Republicans that want to talk issues. It's one of the problems we had with Newt Gingrich is he would say these fiery things and it would be on the front page of newspapers for a month or so. But we've been talking this morning about all the distractions that are out there. And I know this has been a concern of yours. I know you want to talk about, the cost of housing, the cost of gas, the cost of bread, the cost of other groceries, the cost of so many issues that matter. But it seems that for every issue you want to talk about, there seems to be another distraction coming out. And as I say on the show every day, it's as if my former party hasn't learned from the past election results.
I would agree. I've said that all week. We have not learned from the midterm elections. We haven't learned post-Roe what really upsets and angers Americans. I represent a swing district. When I came into Congress 2 years ago, I won by 1 point. And when my district was redrawn last year, I got 1.5 points better. Not much of a margin. But I learned and figured out how, as a conservative, to reach across the aisle in my first 2 years in office and deliver results and talk about issues that matter. The number one issue in the swing district that I represent, of course, was inflation. But the number two issue was abortion, and is an issue that Republicans didn't do very well on the summer after Roe. Racing to the fringes on either side of the aisle is not where about 90% of Americans are. It's an issue that I care about deeply. I even had to run an ad about my own rape as a teenager, as I wanted people to know, I want women to know that I was going to find a way to balance women's rights and the right to life, because I am pro-life, but there's got to be a balance there. And so, we have to be very vocal on issues that matter. Inflation and abortion were the top two issues. I'm not the only swing district in the country, but those are important issues. And we've got to deliver something that both Republicans and Democrats alike can be on the same page. I mean, we have a divided Congress. We've got to work together.
Yeah, and so I want to just develop on that issue with that lesson post-Roe in the midterms. What was the lesson that was learned about how many Republican women and men care about this issue and feel differently than what was previously assumed? And how can you get the message to your fellow Republicans about how to deal with this? Because it is a critical issue and some that some Republicans campaign on the other side of it.
Right, and I'm pro-life, but the vast majority of people in my district didn't agree with Roe being overturned, and we would hold town hall after town hall trying to find and talk about that common ground and not racing to the fringes. And I would ask my colleagues, show some compassion to women, show compassion especially to rape victims or girls who are victims of incest. We've got to show love and compassion even when we disagree, and not act like Alpha Hotels sometimes, which is what we do on some of these issues, because we want to beat our chest and we want the base to love us. But I just proved in this election, I had two big elections this year, a big primary and a big general election, that you can stay true to your principles and your values, you can find middle ground, and you can win big. And that's the lesson I learned that many of my colleagues haven't quite figured it out yet. And I am very worried about our agenda. I know that there are other swing district Republicans that we want to stay in the majority, and we're going to have to be vocal sooner rather than later. We're going to have to come together and find a dozen of us who are going to put a stop to some of this when it happens.
Congresswoman, it's really fascinating what happened in Kansas. I think is one of the more remarkable election outcomes in quite some time. I never saw it coming. That was supposed to be a 50-50. We always talk about how two things can be true at the same time, and you brought it up. There are a lot of people who are pro-life, who've identified as being pro-life their entire life, and at the same time, they don't think Roe should have been overturned. David French, it reminds me, David French, who's always been pro-life, said we can't allow courts to push this on the American people by judicial fiat. We're going to have to actually go out and start making the argument, making the pro-life argument and explaining what we're doing. And love you to comment on that, first of all. But secondly, like you to comment on the fact of how much damage the examples of, like for instance, of what we saw, the 10-year-old girl raped in Ohio that had to flee the state, the Michigan gubernatorial candidate saying a 14-year-old girl being raped by her uncle is a perfect reason why there can't be exceptions. Can you talk about how shrill and how out of touch that is, not just with swing voters, but with Republican voters in your district?
Right. Well, now, just this week, I think it was the governor of Alabama said that women should be thrown in prison if they take an abortion pill. So, I mean, Plan B is something that 90% of America supports. Women shouldn't be thrown in prison. Neither should doctors at this juncture either. But one of the things that I've been harping on this week and for months now is that if we're going to get serious about saving lives, right, if we were serious about that issue, we have to have legislation that'll pass a Democrat-controlled Senate and a Republican-controlled House. One of the things that we could do right now is giving women access to birth control. If you want to get serious about saving lives and protecting women's rights, then every woman should have access to birth control. In South Carolina, we have entire counties and rural areas that don't have a single OBGYN doctor. So if we want to get serious about saving lives, let's get serious about it. And that is something that people on both sides of the aisle can champion and get behind, and it's something that could be passed into law by the President of the United States. But, we're racing to the fringes. I have a colleague in the House right now that wants to bring a bill to the floor that bans all abortions with no exceptions. What are we doing here? That's not where 90% of the country is, especially Republicans. I've polled the issue over and over and over again. And I would argue the vast majority, not just in my district, but across the state of South Carolina, they agree with us on this one.
So, Congresswoman, the fringes and that extremism you're talking about there certainly played into the outcome of the midterm elections a couple of months ago, where the House was much closer than I know a lot of you all would have liked it to be or expected it to have been, and the Democrats actually picked up a seat in the Senate. So with some distance now, how do you assess what happened and what needs to change inside your party to broaden its appeal? Do you think, for example, your party needs to untether itself from Donald Trump?
Well, I would argue, and there were even some seats in Colorado, for example, where it was very close. We had an R+9 seat that the person won by about 500 votes.
Right.
So we do have a messaging issue and messaging on issues. Inflation is the number one issue across the aisle. People are worried about the cost of everything, as Joe mentioned earlier. That is something we have to address without harming Social Security. That is a message we have to get across. I have a bill called the Penny Plan that Rand Paul does every cycle in the Senate. I do the House Companion bill. It balances the budget in 10 years without touching Social Security. We've got to have the right message on economic issues, because Republicans and Democrats alike, they've both had problems with deficit spending and running it up, and have caused inflation to happen. Number one. Number two, where most people are fiscally conservative, but they tend to be socially moderate. We've got to have a compassionate message that embraces women that agree and disagree with Roe. That is an important issue this summer. I saw it over and over again in my district. I would have town halls and women would show up very angry about it and wanted to know what the plan was. And we have to have a plan that is grounded, that is middle of the road, and brings both sides together. It is a very important issue. Crime and immigration is another place where, we have to figure that out, the border, securing the border. But at the same time, a lot of people, we have a lot of jobs that are needed. So what are we going to do to fix the visa issues that we have here, which by and large would fix immigration if we could get and discuss the policy about it, raising those caps that are arbitrarily low when we have a lot of jobs that people could do here and then go back home after 9 months. But we've got to talk about real issues that are affecting real communities. And right now we're distracted by last week. We're distracted by the agenda this week. We're distracted by George Santos. We can't get to the meat of the problems that our country is facing right now. And if that continues, we're going to have a very difficult time 2 years from now. And you're going to hear me, my voice. I'll be very strong and very loud about the issues that matter in my state and in my country, because it's just too important to ignore.
And do you think, to the second part of my question, Congresswoman, at this point in 2023, that Donald Trump is a net positive or a net negative for your party?
I hope when it comes to presidential politics that we have a very large, wide, and deep presidential candidate field. I want to see us, whomever our nominee is, look towards the future and not towards the past. That hurt us in the midterm elections, and we've got to have someone that can bring together conservatives, independents, left of center and right of center. And if we don't have that in our nominee in 24, we're going to lose the White House. We might even lose the U.S. House.